Hi, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Thank you all for joining us this Thursday afternoon. As people come trickling in. Welcome. I'm Nina Della Salas. I'm the Senior Associate at Emin Associates, Inc. And today we're starting a new two-part series on cultural responsive evaluation framework and practices featuring Dr. Katrina Bledsoe. Next slide, please. And to get us started, I'd like to ask you all to introduce yourself and also post a question about what you're curious about this topic. And also, if you have apply CRE in your work, please let us know too. And your questions and remarks will help us guide today's session. Next slide, please. Before we begin, let me quickly go over a few housekeeping items. So first, again, if you're just joining us, please, welcome and introduce yourself, and please post a question that you want to ask about CRE or culturally responsive evaluation. We're also, second, want to also make note that we have closed captioning. So thank you, Heather, for helping us with that effort. And we also have our colleague, Jamila Blake, who is helping us in this session. So if you have any questions or run into technical issues, please let Jamila know. And she will post her contact information in chat. And it's also jblake, JBLAKE, @AAAS.org in case you run into any issues. So thank you, Heather and Jamila, for your help. And also, want to appreciate any feedback you're providing throughout this discussion, and there will be a survey at the end. So please, if you can, come and complete those survey questions. And so in advance, thank you so much. Next slide, please. So it is important for me to share a few disclaimers with you. So this material is based upon work supported by the National Science Foundation under grant number 2224093. Any opinions, findings, interpretations, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this material are those of its authors and do not represent the views of the AAAS Board of Directors, the Council of AAAS membership, or the National Science Foundation. Additionally, the AAAS STEM REC is promoting consultation with Emin Associates, Inc., as they are a REC partner. However, this does not constitute an endorsement of Emin Associates, Inc. as evaluators by the National Science Foundation. Next slide, please. So for those of you who don't know, this is just a quick snapshot about AAAS's STEM REC. And we invite you to check us out at the website to learn more about it. And we will post that in our chat. And also, if you haven't already, to please go ahead and join us in the listserv, and so you will get a monthly newsletter. Next slide, please. This diagram shows how we are organized. So the REC is managed by AAAS in coordination with NSF, but the full team is comprised of several partner organizations, including Emin Associates, Inc. And M&A provides research and evaluation technical assistance support to current and prospective STEM awardees, and we're happy to facilitate this webinar. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, this is a two-part series. We'll focus more on application and real-world examples of CRE next week. So please join us for part 2 of the series. That's Thursday, November 6th at 3 p.m. And you can register for the webinar using the link posted in the chat. Next slide, please. So for today, we will work through the foundational aspects of cultural responsive evaluation. Next slide, please. So it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Katrina Bledsoe today. She is a partner at Strategic Learning Partners for Innovation. She is a mixed methodologist by training and in practice who specializes in quasi-experimental and mixed methods designs. Dr. Bledsoe has led evaluation projects involving federal agencies such as the United States Agency for International Development, also known as USAID, and the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA. She has also worked with foundations such as the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and the NEEKC Foundation, as well as community organizations, including the Johnson C. Smith University's Smith Institute. So thank you for coming, Dr. Bledsoe.
Thanks. It's I appreciate it, everybody, for being here. Thanks, everyone, for welcoming me. And every time I see that former picture that looks like my mother, this one looks more like me. So I just appreciate being here. So thank you. We want to talk a little bit about CRE today. And at some point, I'll get a sense of where folks are in having had experience with culturally responsive evaluation. And so I hope that this will be a little bit of a dialogue. I'm going to talk for a little bit. I hope I'm not talking too much, but I definitely want to hear from folks and just see where folks are in the thought of being able to do culturally responsive evaluation. But let me tell you just a tiny bit about myself as well. Yes, I'm a mixed methodologist by training. It's funny, every time I put together a bio, I'm always having to figure out exactly what I'd last said, but I'm an applied social psychologist and mixed methodologist. I would probably call myself a pracademician, a half practitioner, half academician, and in the way that we're doing things and being a bridge of bringing good knowledge to community-based settings. I've been in a lot of portfolios. Education and STEM, weirdly enough, have been my deepest portfolio, but I've also been in health, some guaranteed income, and I do a weird amount of visitor studies work as well, which I'm very proud to be doing and being involved with museums as well. So all that to say is I'm kind of a little bit of a generalist, and I go where the work is, and I go where there's where people want to live better and live better lives. So I think that's the best way to say it. So I will get us started on what are we hoping to get today? So hoping today to delve into culturally responsive evaluation framework a little bit, talk a little bit about what it is and what are some of the underpinnings of the approach, and to sort of think about what it means to be culturally competent and responsive in evaluation, what that means, and then maybe just sort of like to like look over in the direction of STEM and how it might be used for STEM evaluation work, especially in its work with those most impacted in lower income communities. So I like to start off this. I don't know why I really like this slide. Well, I do know why I like this slide. So there's there's a piece of me that really values the understanding of how we get to thinking the way that we do and doing research and evaluation. And that underpins that is sort of like a philosophy of science underpinnings. And one of the things I learned when I was in graduate school was actually the first three of these things, or not the first three, but the second through the fourth, which was ontology, epistemology, and methodology, and axiology. But all of that undergirds how we do research and evaluation, how we outlook, and how we pull together our designs, our approaches, our methods, all of that. That's the foundation of what we set on. So that's why I put this slide in, so that you could kind of see exactly what we're talking about when we talk about it in terms of culturally responsive evaluation. So just to sort of give folks, and my apologies if I am repeating something that you already know, please put that in the chat as well and say yay or nay. But the axiology piece is something that was added later by my colleague and mentor, Donna Mertens, which is really about the value of why we do what we do. what's good, what's right, how do we respect cultural norms, what are we talking about, why bother to do an evaluation, why bother to do research, why bother to put together a program or design, what's good and what's right, sort of I'm going to say the ethical part of it. And then there's the ontology, which is what's considered reality, and recognizing that reality is a little bit of a moving target. It's really about what seems real at the time and what has meaning at the time. And then the idea of the epistemology, what can we know about it? What's fact? What's versus opinion? And we know that that's a big thing right now in the sense of there's sort of dueling perspectives about science and what can be considered science and what is about that. So it's sort of like the constitution of what is knowledge and what makes knowledge up, and that we understand that knowledge is socially and historically located, and that sometimes knowledge is based on a trusting relationship. If we trust where we get the knowledge, then that knowledge has meaning for us. And then finally, the methodology, which is really about how are we going to go about getting that information? How are we going to go about knowing that knowledge? What feels good? What sources do we trust? Qualitative, quantitative, a mix, our best friend, TikTok, the news. Where are we getting that information, and what do we trust to be able to get us good, valid, credible information? So that four-prong piece underlies, for me, culturally responsive evaluation. As a general, that's the foundation it sits on, and I'm going to try to make that case and hope that you'll think it's worthwhile to consider for your work with STEM. So let me give you a definition of culturally responsive evaluation. So it's an evaluation framework that acknowledges how culture and context shape meaning, success, and evidence. So you heard what I just said there, how culture and context shape what we consider meaning, what's success, and what's evidence. It also assumes that evaluation and the process of doing evaluation, and I'll throw in research as well, is not neutral. It is not objective. It's actually influenced by people's histories, languages, values, and environments. And I'm going to add perspectives and experiences. So we assume that evaluation, the way that we do things, when we come in with that, it's influenced by the way that we do the work, who we're doing the work with, and even by whom that work is being done. So context, culture, how we think about the ways of the world and our experiences with them really influence a culturally responsive evaluation. So I just gave you a brief thing here, but I wanted to, before we get into it, this is the poll number one. There's a couple of polls because I like to do a couple of those, and I'm hoping that my Mentimeter is going to work out okay. But I just wanted to get a sense in the room. This is not a major survey, y'all. It's just a survey. It's just to get a sense of where you all are and what you're thinking. So you can participate at menti.com. The code is 59652372. And for those of you who want to share your experiences in the chat, you can, with using a culturally responsive evaluation approach, if any, or if not, please do so. Would love to hear that. And I'm going to switch over so that we can see what y'all are saying. All right, all right. Got a few folks. Okay. Yay for the one person. Yay. I'll be calling on you. Right. Give it for, and for anybody else who wanted to say a word, give just another second. Yep. So what I'm looking at is people are actually, there are some folks, at least the folks who are participating in this particular little survey, this little poll actually, that people are mostly, they're somewhat familiar with it. They've heard it. They probably have heard it fly by them at some point. We have one person who is very familiar, so we'll assume that there's some folks on here who are very familiar, and then some folks who are just not familiar at all, and totally appreciate that as well. We appreciate all of that. And thanks to those of you who just participated in this little poll, just to give a sense of that. I'd love to know, I don't know if anybody put anything in the chat about that, about, if you've had any experience with the concepts and what you thought about it. Kavita, Nina, if there's anything there.
No, no one has added in, but I know maybe we can later on ask Yolanda and Sylvia to kind of chime in. We have Bonnie, mostly from evaluating CDC projects. Okay, thanks, Bonnie.
Yes, thanks, Bonnie. Thanks. Really appreciate that as well. Yeah, I think CDC's been involved quite a bit with community-based and culturally responsive or culturally competent. Culturally responsive is actually I'd say it's probably one of several types of culturally responsive approaches, and sort of people-centered approaches, as I'll call them. And these are, and you'll hear about them if you've been involved in them in different spaces. You might have been involved and not known it was actually culturally responsive. So just wanted to get a sense of that. So let me just talk a little bit about the theoretical roots of a culturally responsive evaluation. So it really draws from anthropology, psychology, sociology, and philosophy of science. So now we're going back to that original framework that I showed you about the axiology, ontology, epistemology, and methodology. So it's based on those, and that there are some core assumptions to that theoretical roots, is that there are multiple realities. So we know that people experience programs differently. That makes perfect sense to me. But we also often understand that research and evaluation often looks for generalizability and generalities. But sometimes that goes against the idea that people are experiencing things very differently and have very different outcomes. We know that there are multiple ways of knowing, and that knowledge is shaped by worldview, meaning that there are different ways to get the knowledge itself. There may be, we have what I like to call the big five. You've got surveys, you've got interviews, focus groups, document reviews, and some observations. But beyond that, there are different ways of knowing, and how do we know, and what's considered credible evidence, and will those different ways of knowing, have we decided that they are valid and that they will yield evidence that we're willing to use and make decisions on. And finally, some of the core assumptions of it is that evaluation carries values and interpretations within it. It's a little bit on the constructivist, interpretivist side of the way that we do research, but understanding that evaluation itself, how we do the evaluation, carries values, and how we interpret also carries values as well. So again, some of those key theoretical evidence: culture, shared systems of meaning and behavior; context, social. And when we talk about context, we're talking about social context, institutional, environmental surroundings. They can be virtual surroundings. All of that. Context is pretty broad, as is culture as well. I think we tend to think culture as sometimes ethnically, but we really have to think about culture. When we talk about culturally responsive, we're talking about a cultural general milieu, if you call it that way, about the way that we think and act in certain contexts and situations. And then finally, those values, those underlying beliefs that shape what success means, or what failure means, or what meaning, what aspects have meaning and what will not. So what we value, our context, and our culture shape a lot of, one, what we evaluate, and two, how we evaluate it. So I'll give you the framework on this, and as you can see, let me see if I can go. Let me see if I can go to full screen. My apologies, it's full screen on my slide here. Am I at full screen yet?
It appears to me, Jamila, is it full screen on your end? Looks, yeah. So
Is it
go
full screen?
ahead. Yeah,
Okay,
I think we're
great.
good. Thank
Okay, my apologies, everyone. Just want to make sure folks can see. So the CRE framework evaluation, this is from Hood, Hobson, and Kirkhart in 2015. But since then, they have, of course, this has been a framework that has been used quite a bit. And I just want to let folks know, culturally responsive evaluation has been around since the 90s. And probably had at least the theoretical framing before that in the 80s. And so with that background, that has been sort of the underlying historical background of that. But it has been something that has been always in the background for about 30 something years. But now, as we become much more of a global society, we understand how this would come to the fore a little bit more. But the framework itself, you can see this framework looks, I always have this from people as they say, well, it's a framework that I would use. We prepare for the evaluation, we engage stakeholders, we identify the evaluation, we frame the questions, we design the evaluation, we select and adapt the instrumentation, we collect the data, we analyze the data, and we disseminate the results. Yeah, it sounds like something we normally do. What really is the key for CRE is that we're always thinking from it at every step of the way. We think about it from a culturally responsive perspective. And so I would probably say, as you can see, the arrows go to every aspect. So instead of just saying, well, we're going to just do a little bit in terms of collecting the data, we'll be culturally responsive, but we're not elsewhere. And I'm not saying that that doesn't happen. That happens probably a lot more than we would think. But I'm saying that a true culturally responsive evaluation framework thinks about culture, context, and values all the way from the beginning. And you'll also notice that it is circular, meaning that it's an iterative process. I might even say a little bit more that this is a process that sort of is a little bit more complex and more like the artist, because I was in an art museum recently, the artist Jackson Pollock, who sort of had the splash perspective. There's a little bit of that going on as well here, because you may prepare for the evaluation and you spend the first four steps really putting in a lot of effort to get the relational aspects, to really understand what is being evaluated, what the values are, where the context is, all of that, and the culture. And then as you go throughout the rest of the process, you might find that you end up, by the time you get to dissemination and results, you might say, oh, we might have actually revisited the purpose of the evaluation 3 times. We might have actually gone to select and adapt instrumentation at another 2 times, because at every aspect we're being informed by culture, context, values, and getting a broader, and as some of my communities say, robust understanding of what really truly is going on in the community, to be able to provide a broad understanding and to be able to provide the kind of evidence that people feel like they can lean on, act on, and what's considered success and what's considered a challenge. and that people can actually use to be resilient in the work that they're doing. And I'm saying that because that I've had that often said to me, working in communities, about being able to have a process that always considered at every step the culture, the context, and the values. So you'll have and we'll get more into that next week about what that looks like, because again, I'm sure a lot of folks are looking at it, well, that looks like something we do. But wanted to say a little bit about CRE, what really underlies it and makes the difference to it is that it is a lens or a philosophy, an approach, and a perspective. Not simply a checklist. You're not going through saying we decided we're going to do surveys, so therefore it's that. It's really the lens of what we're thinking about doing or how we're going to engage. Once we have that lens that we're thinking about, well, what's in the context? What is the culture? What are the values that are driving this? That has us take a whole different perspective about what kind of methods we're going to use, what kind of design we want to put together, who do we disseminate, who's going to listen, who's of influence, how will information be influenced, used to influence aspects. It also informs the logic of inquiry, again, what counts as meaningful knowledge. And what I always say is what counts as credible evidence is actually informed by that CRE lens, philosophy, and perspective. So I'm talking here a little bit about this because, as I mentioned, where I feel like that axiology and epistemology and methodology and all that underlies that. Karen Kirkhardt talks about like how we do the work and what makes an evaluation and a research project actually credible in that sense. And this is where I feel like this undergirds CRE, is that it's a sort of a multicultural validity in the sense of that when we talk about validity, we want to know how close we can get. How precise can we be to a particular prescribed way of thinking or what we would like to see. But in a multicultural validity, Karen Kirkhardt thinks of it as 5 ways. There's 5 parts to it. There's a relational part that really underlies how valid the information is going to be. It's the quality of the relationships that surround and infuse the evaluation process. So how close are we? How well do we understand the people who are there? What kind of relationships do we have? Is it trusting? Is it not? And then, of course, there's the theoretical aspect, is how close are we to actually the theories that we hold, whether they're informal theories or evidence-based theories, how close are they to really understanding the perspectives of the community, the context? How well do they fit? And the congruence of the experiential, which is the congruence of the life experience, the lived experience of the participants in the program. How close is it to that? Is that included? Is that reflected in the work that in the evaluation process? And then the consequential, which is the social consequences of the understanding and judgments. Do we understand what the judgments and the consequences are and the actions to be taken from that information that we gather? Do we pathologize? Do we raise? Are we showing resilience? And what will the consequences be from those results, and then the dissemination of those results? And then, of course, which underlies all of this is, of course, the cultural appropriateness of the epistemology, meaning what kind of design are we using? Is it the most appropriate design, or is it a design that people think we should have, but it's not really the most appropriate design? And when we think about all of this, this opens up for us to sort of really consider sort of like, I don't know, someone once told me that kaleidoscopes were out, and I guess they probably are, but kaleidoscopes used to be those things that you had as a kid where you would turn and all the different colors would come up in a very different way. This 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 allows us to sort of think about this in a kaleidoscope kind of perspective. Um, in that way. So I think the multicultural validity is really helpful in having us think about how CRE can broaden our perspective in terms of that of being able to do an evaluation that really provides a full-bodied understanding of what's happening. So one of the things that as I was talking with the folks here as we prepared for this webinar was trying to get an understanding of where CRE is and the evolution of CRE, and you notice that I said it's a lens of how we do things, and you know the evolution of CRE before that. Early evaluation models have always, and even the evaluation models we still have now, assumed universality and objectivity, and I think we still hold on to that quite a bit in a lot of ways. But here we're trying to really think about contextuality and that, you know, trying to think about that. But even before then, before CRE, I think a lot of it is that we understood contextuality, but the issue is that we always want generalizability. How can we go across large swaths of communities and serve a lot of folks at the same time? But I would probably say that's a little harder to do, partially because of the fact that we just simply have very different and varying experiences. They vary by our backgrounds, they vary by region, they vary by where we live, and sometimes we just simply can't do it that way. So that variation that we're trying to address, it gets harder to do. So what might work in one situation doesn't work in another. I remember when I would teach class, what worked in one class that I literally could turn around 20 minutes later and did not work in another. But it depended upon the culture of the class and where they were situated and just generally people's experiences. So with CRE, what we're seeing now with that idea of moving away from those early evaluation models and having to account across settings. And I know that folks in STEM, you're in various settings, you know that things work differently in different settings. So we're shifting towards from program-centered to more people-centered, and that's some of my colleagues, myself, Perez Trancoso, Hobson, Peterman, and Melton. We're all also talking about really playing up what we're calling people-centered, the people-centered piece, where evaluation now considers relationships and experiences shapes programs, outcomes, input strategies. It shapes all of that. So understanding that how that people bring with them their own experiences, and of course you've heard the term lived experience, but how that plays and how that influences um, how how we experience things and how well or successful a a strategy might be. So CRE is evolutionary and evolutionizing itself in sort of emphasizing the people focus, meaning again, meaning arises from the relationships, not just between the participants and the program and the general environment, but also with the evaluator. And you know, our evaluation role now is not detached, but much more relational and interpretive. So being the detached person usually doesn't get an understanding that understanding or becoming somewhat familiarized with what is happening in a community or in a setting or in a program situation is helpful. So in this, the evaluator is people too, as part of this. And then the emphasis is on understanding how interventions functions for the people involved, not just whether or not they meet the targets, not just whether or not we've trained a lot of people, but how have we trained them? What are they experiencing, and what will they take with them that can, as I say, make for a better community, a better society, and a better civil society. So not just how interventions are working, but really about the people who are experiencing the interventions, because that's why we're doing them anyway. Even if it seems like we're putting together a policy, ultimately it comes down to the people that we are with. So I'm just going to say a couple of last words here on participatory research and community involvement. I show this continuum to sort of let to like remind people about there are people involved here, and often when we're doing research and evaluation, we're often more towards the left side. I hope it's showing up as the left side on your side, on your screen, but it's more towards outreach, and then consult is usually what we've been doing. But the goal in a CRE and a people-centered perspective is to collaborate with shared leadership, because after all, it's people who actually it's really about the people who know their lives best. So I'm just going to say this here, a couple of just how it fits to you all who are in the STEM context. So STEM and NSF writ large has been serving talented scholars in a lot of different perspectives and programs and initiatives. But STEM has been serving talented scholars with financial need, and that's aiming to expand access to STEM education and careers. So basically broadening who all is in and expanding who all is in STEM, and understanding that different and wide perspectives make for an innovative and forward-thinking STEM field and career. So, and your programs often operate within diverse and institutional and community settings. So as they showed at the beginning of this webinar, is that you have a lot of different scholars in diverse institutional and community settings, but all of it's designed to broaden this, meaning that you can go anywhere and find a good STEM researcher or good science, technology, engineering, math scholar, and someone who can basically change the world can come in any setting. So we're trying to also think a little bit about that. What would it look like if you did CRE in thinking about evaluating as STEM? So we think that the theoretical stance of CRE could help evaluators conceptualize how the various interventions, activities, they function within their situation. So with that CRE, what if there's something that's happening or a new perspective, or people, or you have new groups that are coming in that you never would have thought so, but they have different ways of thinking and being. How do we find out if these activities will work, and in what way they may work very differently, but effectively than what you would have thought, maybe using that CRE perspective. And scholar experiences and outcomes cannot be separated from the relational dynamics of faculty mentoring and peer networks and institutional climate. Basically, everybody experiences it differently. And you have to understand that those outcomes are related to all of those aspects, and that how does that sort of wrap around, how do all those, like faculty mentoring, peer networks, and institutional climate, how does that make for the kind of experience and outcomes that you're going to see. People can always be in the same program, get different mentors, have a different network, and come up with two very, very different understandings and experiences. And the meaning of success, of course, and I know you all know this more than I do, it varies by program environment and scholar experience. So what's considered success for one scholar might be a little less than success for another. And that context always matters, and that how people react to context is a way that that influences that. And so a CRE perspective can help understand and underlie and be able to pull some of those nuances out. So if you're thinking about evaluations from a CRE perspective, what would that look like? Maybe some evaluations framed through a CRE theory. They might ask, how does institutional culture shape participation? You might ask things such as, what contextual factors affect persistence in STEM? What do we find that might be across the way but might look different in every aspect? What tenets are there? How do relationships support scholar achievement? Is a close relationship good? Is it a multifaceted relationship with lots of folks? You never know. So these are some of these kinds of questions that they might ask. And then CRE provides that theoretical logic for exploring these questions systematically, because it underlies and it allows you the opportunity to look at the context, the culture, the values that underlie some of those questions. So I know I've given a lot. I just wanted to just sort of put that out there. Honestly, I actually have taught 8 hours on this. So, so we're doing sort of the quick drive-by to some degree, but just to get your thoughts. One, if you have an opportunity in the chat, put what are you thinking about what I just said? And then two, if you want to go to menti.com and talk about what are some of the perceived or known barriers that you think that would be to using these approaches for your STEM program, if any. So you go to menti.com, it's code 22881698, and I have a word cloud there, so I'm asking you to give me a word that puts that together. Let me go there right here. Yes, time and resources. Mhm. I probably should have started that with that. Yep. Time. If you have another, I'll give another second here for those folks. And trust. Yes. Time, resources, and trust. Yep. Anybody else wants to add? I know I had a few people. Okay. Hard. Yeah, that too. Okay. Yep. Yep. Well, thanks for those folks who put that in there, and I'm going to move to that last slide on that, and just say that we got a couple key takeaways, which is it is a theoretical framework, and I'm going to go back to that Menti in a minute. It's centered on culture, context, and meaning. Its evolution reflects a move towards people-centered. And for STEM, this theory provides a lens for understanding how programs function within the real world context of scholars and institutions, not what we think we have when we put these together, but the Constitution, but what's really happening. So just to sort of go back to that Menti, that idea that it is, I'll say this, it's like dating in a way. Everything's a relationship because you do have to put in time, resources, and it is hard, and you do have to put in trust as well. And so it slows down the continuum of, or at least the process of doing evaluation research. And people always say, well, we don't have that kind of time. And and I understand that as well. But I will say this, if you sometimes we have to put in some time up front to get exactly what we want, because there are a lot of times, are we actually doing it because we're doing it, or are we doing it to save time? Are we doing it to actually do something, to actually make a difference in that space, to get some level of understanding? Now, are people able to do a full CRE? There may be parts that you might be doing, and we'll talk about that next week. But the truth is that at some point, we do have to figure out exactly what we're doing with these evaluations that we're talking about, whether it's STEM or anything else. Are you doing it just to do it, or are you doing it because you really want some kind of change, you really want an understanding? So I'm calling it, these are my references and my some resources, which I think will be put together as well. And I want to open it up for questions, comments, thoughts, anything. And I
Thank you,
will.
Dr. Bledsoe. Yes, so just want to take this opportunity to, have your questions answered and pose those questions as well. I think one of the things that we saw was, and this kind of relates to something you've already said, is does participatory research fit in CRE approach?
Does it,
So,
yes, yes, very much so.
yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Then I would,
Um, Go
I'll,
ahead, please.
I would say they're very intertwined. And in fact, a CRE approach is based on, it assumes there's some level of participatory parts in that. And I know that that doesn't feel comfortable for research because we're just not taught that way. But go ahead, Nina, sorry.
No, no, that's fine. So kind of want to dig a little bit deeper and kind of look into the connections between CRE and STEM, particularly, so one pose this, what did you find surprising when adopting the CRE framework when evaluating STEM related projects?
Yeah, that's very interesting. That is, we've been doing that. And in fact, I've been working with a group that's out of the that's been NASA funded, and looking at that and using that brought us to it was interesting in the sense that there was an ecosystem. So NASA has been sort of working with this ecosystemic perspective, and very sort of similar to STEM, but adjacent. Um, and what they found was, in applying this, is that one, communities were very involved in this perspective of being able to like be involved in making better understanding of the data, being able to have people ask the right questions that made sense. And when I say right questions, I mean right questions for the situation. And also, I think that there was a bit more use of evaluation, like methods or methods to evaluate, that were a little bit on the not among the big five. So people were more likely to use photo voice, or since we were working with indigenous cultures as well, the use of the storytelling. How do we make sense of that? But it really has. I think it's sort of, it's taken a little bit longer, definitely, but it has given a much more robust understanding of what's happening in those ecosystems. And as well, I think the evaluators are much more trusted for what they bring to the evaluative setting. They're also trusted with dissemination, and also trusted with, when they're bringing back data and information, they're trusted with that information of, hey, yeah, that makes sense to us because we've been working with you on this. I think I think it's those who are in the sciences sometimes that struggle with that, because I know my background in research methodology, I was never trained to think about, one, I wasn't trained in qualitative at all. And two, I was never trained to really think about the context. It was that you thought about the context to be able to like control it. It was more about control, not about trying to work with the complexity of it all. But I think that STEM projects, especially these types of projects where you're trying to sort of broaden who has access, has been in a way, that's just my opinion, I think they've actually benefited from that and getting a better understanding, as well as being able to understand what science means and who has understanding of it and who's actually been doing science, even if not in the way that we have decided science is supposed to go.
Mm, mm. So this might be a preview and a kind of a teaser for next week. But can drill down, like just using that NASA example, can you kind of illustrate how um, like by approaching the evaluation, using the CRE lens, really create a much more robust, perspective that will sustain really what has come about through the funding and through the project.
Yeah, one of the things, and thanks for that question, Nina, and for the amalgamation of that question as well. And thanks for all the chats as well. Hopefully, I get a chance to read them all. But but I think with that, one of the things that CRE, and again, this is my perspective. I think there are other people who might do this, who might be on this call and might be in different places. But I find that the first four aspects that we talked about, which is preparing for the evaluation, engaging, framing the right questions, thinking about, all the other aspects of it. I I think that is really, that lays the foundation of what you're going to be able to do at a later date, how you're going to be able to design. And in terms of, it allows you to sort of also be open to what else might there be besides that, what it is that everybody has decided that's an outcome that they want. So I have found that a CRE perspective has has allowed me to look a little bit more at unintended outcomes and
Mm,
unintended consequences that may have occurred. It's also allowed me to look at the kinds of relationship, who, a good social network analysis can't be undersold at all, because looking at who has influence and how things, what policies override, what can be done, who can get around what, that helps you understand what all is happening. And then there are times where something looks awfully good and it seems like it might actually work, but then you start finding out underneath all of that, the more you dig and continually dig, because what it does is it's a relational piece too as well. It's a relational perspective, that you're always in relationships, so people will tell you different things, that you can say, oh, okay, that's why that didn't go well, or oh, we thought we were going to be able to do this survey, but we're finding out that there was another survey done, and oh, by the way, it was done by that last organization, and everybody's had some trauma around that. Okay, let's think about this. So being able to have that broader understanding, that allows for everybody to understand a better understanding of the context. It allows for a better relationship, and people will, if they can trust you, and that, back to that word cloud, they can trust you, they can tell you, and then you can actually understand what may or may not work in the evaluation. I find that trust goes a long way, and that relational piece goes a long way. And I know often we're there to just get stuff and we don't have time to do a relationship, but how many times have, I mean, how many times have you gone somewhere and you're just like, that didn't go well at all because the relationship just wasn't there. But it's also, if you put the time in up front, then at a later date things go a lot quicker. it goes a lot quicker because you got a date.
Yeah. So thank you. And I think I see like others are also chiming in kind of similarly. So appreciate that. So unfortunately, we're going to be winding down here, but want to come back to our slides for just a moment.
Yes. Oh, hold on. Let me go back to the slides.
I think Jamila's got it, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks.
Jamila's got it. So thanks, Jamila. So if you have any additional questions after this webinar or would like to request some consultation with us, M&A, please use this link or this QR code that gets us to the evaluation technical assistance request form, and we will get that information, pull that information out of that one. So, and we'll put that also in the chat. Next slide, please, Jamila. So if you haven't noticed already, we like to give you a lot of information as resources. And so here's more resources for you. So just want to highlight some things. We've added new stuff in our repository. And also, I just saw that this past week, we've got the new deep dive report on identifying and selecting STEM scholars. So, just timely. So if you want to take a look at that, it's available in the resource. And then for those who are thinking about applying for the next round, you see here the guidebook for preparing research and evaluation. It's a great resource. It was really helpful last time around, so we think it's going to be as applicable this time around. So please check those out, and links will also be provided in the chat. Next slide, please. So the reason we got into talking with Dr. Bledsoe is because of feedback from you. So it's really important that you complete the survey because this is how we sustain and make sure that the webinars and all the other activities that we do is relevant to you. So please hit that link or the QR code and let us know how this is working for you and what other topics you want to address. And we will get back to you and make sure that happens. Next slide, please. So most of you are probably mulling all that's been covered, and so we have our community here, and so we encourage you to explore some more what we have here at AAA Rec, and also we have all these connections with our mailing list, LinkedIn, and Blue Sky. So we want to continue this conversation and especially continue the conversation next week. So hopefully for those who were able to, query your question or would like to ponder about it a little bit more, looking at Yolanda and Sylvia, please join us again and we can really get into the nitty gritty of some of the details that Dr. Bledsoe just teased with us. So with that, any last minute thoughts from anyone? Dr. Bledsoe?
No, thanks everybody. Appreciate it. And next week we'll talk a little bit more of the how-to. Again, this was a theoretical piece so that people could understand and just appreciate that. So we'll talk next week about the how-to.